Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. It's a Ukraine War Frontline update for the 2nd of May 2023. Let's get straight to the northeastern sector, which is the Kupiansk to Kreminna front line, just going down here. On my map, that looks like this. Kupiansk is here, Svatova is there, and then we move further down to Kreminna here. Not too much to report along that whole front line. The ISW American military think tank says Ukrainian National Guard spokesman Muzychuk stated yesterday that, on 2 days ago, that Russian forces are conducting fewer assaults in the Kupiansk direction, but are still heavily using artillery. Russian troops conducted unsuccessful offensive operations in Novoselivska. That's according to the Ukrainians. So Novoselivska is there. Kupiansk-Kreminna, Novoselivska, you got Svatova, and Kupiansk with that smaller settlement, Novoselivska, on the higher ground just to the west of it, that the Russians are trying to push back there. There were claims some time ago that the Ukrainians had got foothold in Kupiansk and they were pressuring the Russians there, but haven't really heard anything since then. The Ukrainian commander of a drone company, Fedorenko, noted that 2 days ago, Russian forces have built 3 to 4 defensive lines within the city of Svatova itself. I have long wondered whether this will be a target for liberating for the Ukrainians. I was thinking that during the Kharkiv counteroffensive, and they stopped short of Svatova. And I thought it would have been a really useful town for them to have taken, but they didn't do that, to have liberated. Instead, you can imagine it's now very well defended. And when you get very well defended towns like that, the best thing to do is not to go through them, but to encircle them and force the Russians to leave on their own accord. Anyway, continuing, there has been ongoing fighting in Bilohorivka. Russian mill bloggers have claimed that on the 30th and yesterday that Russian forces unsuccessfully tried to advance south of Kreminna near Bilohorivka and in the Serebryanska forest area and west of Kreminna near Torska and Nevska. So usual kind of unsuccessful attacks in this direction. If we zoom in a little bit, you've got Torska there and Nevska just up here and the Serebryanska forest there, with Bilohorivka just to the south of that, still seeing activity. But other than that, it's a case of coming down to Bakhmut. Before we pop down to Bakhmut, Rebar, pro-Russian source, says the only information of the entire sector, that there is fighting around Ploshchanka, Balkozarevka Gully. So that probably coincides with in the Nevska direction, because that's where that is, just there. Other than that, it's really about Bakhmut. But interestingly, Syriac Maps, pro-Russian mapper that represents this red line in the Bakhmut area. The yellow line is representing the map of Deep State Map, the pro-Ukrainian mapper. The pro-Russian mapper Syriac Maps has nothing to say about Bakhmut at all. Let's go to what some of the other sources say. We'll go to War Mapper first. So War Mapper shows that there isn't too much to report in terms of movement of territory. There's been no confirmed changes of control since the last update. This is quite rare for the moment. There's a very small block, as according to Poulet-Volon's map here, that the Russians have taken. And then other sources, Ukrainian sources here, and I'll dip into these in more detail in a bit, saying that actually the Ukrainians have done some counterattacks and taken back some territory. And we have Rebar, pro-Russian source, saying in western districts of Bakhmut, the Wagner PMC stormtroopers took control of the first houses of the other side of Tchaikovsky Street. Meanwhile, fierce fighting with Ukrainian units continues on Levanevskoho Street. And that's all they have to say. So let's go to the ISW then, see what they say about Bakhmut. Geolocated footage, and you know I'm going to check it, posted on April 29th and 30th. So remember, this is not from yesterday, but the 2 days before that, show that Russian forces made marginal gains on the T0513 Bakhmut-Siversk highway just south of Sako-Ivanzeti and within western Bakhmut. Let's look at those claims. So here is the area near, these are Russian troops being shelled by the Ukrainians. So this is where the Russians are in trenches here. Let's have a little look to see if that shows any advances as according to my map. No, and actually I haven't changed the mapping up here for ages. So that doesn't show marginal gains at all. That is exactly where you expect the Russians to be, and where they've been for, well, I don't know, probably at least a month. So I would disagree with ISW saying that shows marginal gains, as I often do when they make these claims. So drone drops a bomb and shows the destruction of Bakhmut. Russians enter the green building. So Russians are at this building, and then so we'll check this one first. See if this indicates any advances. Again, that is an advance as of, maybe 3 or 4 days ago. Does it show an advance over yesterday? No, but then they are talking about sort of the 29th and 30th there. So it could represent an advance in that respect. And then the drone hits here, and that's going to be pretty much next door. So I don't think that's going to show, pretty much anything other than, the Russians do control that area, and we already knew that. That doesn't signify any marginal gains for the Russians there. I have not changed my mapping in Bakhmut at all. So this is identical mapping to yesterday, and it's a bit chaotic. So it shows you the blue and the yellow that have not changed. The blue I've kept there to show that Syriac maps indicated a control of territory for the Russians, and moved to the west here in the northern area, and the western area here in the central area here. I don't know what you call it anymore. I mean, the whole of the front line is just tiny pocket to the west. But yeah. So I haven't changed that mapping. Let's then go back to this Ukrainian source saying, Bakhmut direction. Ukrainian armed forces conducted successful counterattacks in the area of the city center and in the north. In the north of Bakhmut, Ukrainian armed forces knocked out militants from at least 10 blocks in the private sector. So this is the northern area here. So that's at least 10 blocks in that area. On my map, that is a counterattack back around here. So if you look at this is the wooded area just to the north, and then just over there would be the reservoir. So that's a reservoir there, and you've got that wooded area. So they're talking about pushing back here. And let's see. So pushing right back to past the that blue. Yeah, so this would be taking some of these blocks back there. That is a claim from that source. I'm not changing my maps on the basis of that. I'm just going to wait to see what the case is after a day or so. Then he says, in the city centre, the situation is tentatively as indicated by the arrows, somewhere near 1 and 2 Lazova streets. But this information needs more confirmation. At the moment, there is a grey zone, and there is still there is a breakthrough of the Ukrainian armed forces, but where exactly is still unconfirmed. The armed forces of Ukraine really counterattacked the enemy in Bakhmut, and it was a maximum surprise for the enemy as it was advancing quite quickly. The Russians were expanding troops and the front, and here is the following. So, yeah, really is claiming that there genuinely is an advance, a counterattack by the Ukrainians. Here we can see the second element of the counterattack is taking place in this area here. It's a complete mess on my map. I'm just I could move my blue lines back to be the most conservative they could be. But yeah, really interested to see what has happened with that counterattack. There have been these rumors that the Ukrainians have a surprise for the Russians. There's this idea that the Russians really are culminating in Bakhmut, and indeed, this is what the RSW says of the area. Ukrainian officials indicated that Wagner Group fighters and other Russian forces are struggling to maintain their pace of offensive operations in Bakhmut. Ukrainian Eastern Group of Forces commander Syrsky stated that Russian forces in Bakhmut conducted numerous attacks but failed to advance, whereas the Ukrainian forces conducted counterattacks and recaptured some Russian positions. A local Ukrainian commander stated that Ukrainian forces have regained the battlefield initiative in some areas of Bakhmut, and Russian forces have failed to cut Ukrainian logistics lines into Bakhmut. Ukrainian Eastern Group Forces spokesperson Cherevati stated that Russian snipers from an unspecified special counter-terror service are operating in Bakhmut, suggesting that the Russian military command may be reallocating additional irregular military units to the front there to compensate for overtired Wagner forces and ineffective Russian force organization in the area. So I did give you some imagery of Russian snipers active in the Bakhmut area from Rob Lee's Telegram thread, uh, but it could well be that the Ukrainians have indeed taken back some territory in and around Bakhmut, but it's no doubt going to be very dynamic, things going backwards and forwards. A few other sources to refer to here. I showed you this in the news video. Some pretty I guess, well, it is horrific. Thermobaric munitions that can vaporize human bodies in certain contexts. Russians using TOS 1A 220 mil MLRS multiple launch rocket system in Bakhmut. Very lethal weapon. Bakhmut is being razed to the ground. Yeah, very much like Marinka here, Marinka 2.0. These thermobaric munitions are being used quite widely there and causing a lot of destruction. Bakhmut appears to be being razed to the ground, which is the new dictionary definition, certainly in Russian dictionaries, of liberation. So this is, as far as I understand it, this is liberation, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So Russians are hitting the area with everything they've got. And yeah, not looking good there. So Tatarigami says in his thread that given the recent speech by Prigozhin, it's important to clarify the situation in Bakhmut. Based on compiled information that I'm allowed to publish, it is true that Wagner is responsible for assaults and advances in Bakhmut. So why do things look grim at their end? Wagner convicts have limited value and only make advances when heavy artillery is present. If the artillery is suppressed or runs out of ammunition, they don't make progress. Unfortunately, the lack of ammunition on our side hinders counter-battery fire. Serious tensions exist between Wagner and the MOD. These tensions exist not only at the top level, but also at the regular level. Some Wagner units act as policing forces, commit crimes, and openly disrespect military commanders with impunity. Poor cooperation between Wagner and MOD results in a lack of coordination between them. The MOD only establishes control over territories captured by Wagner, while Wagner continues to assault forward without proper coordination. The emergence of multiple PMCs, Wagner, Potok, Veteran, Yenisei, Skiff, Tiger, Ibis, Reese, and Wolves have created additional coordination complexities, including logistical challenges, a lack of clear command chains, and insufficient intelligence exchange and coordination. Example, a newly formed Wolves squad drove to Ukrainian lines without coordination, attempted to gain reputation. However, due to their lack of knowledge about the area and the situation, they drove into a landmine and died. The wounded members had to be evacuated. In Bakhmut, Wagner manages to move forward by turning defensive positions into rubble with intense artillery, mortar toss, and air support fire. They are also aware of the Ukrainian forces' lack of artillery ammunition and are not afraid of counter-battery fire. However, Prigozhin himself admitted without artillery ammo, Wagner is ineffective and they can only move forward with huge losses that they cannot sustain. The MOD seems reluctant to provide more support, likely due to their fear of a counterattack at any moment. Without artillery superiority on the field, Wagner's tactics don't work and yield no results and lead to fruitless and unsustainable casualty ratios. We need much more ammo, artillery, and other counter-battery means to nullify their assault capabilities. Wagner troops lack both training and experience in preparing complex and organized defenses. Organizing defenses, establishing firing positions, and managing logistics is a well-structured manner is difficult, and Wagner is not designed or equipped for it. While it's unclear if our command will decide to counterattack in the area, it's quite possible that Russia was able to achieve in the course of 9 months will be reversed within a week and result in a breakthrough and encirclement of Horlivka and the rears of Donetsk. While this is mere speculation on my part, considering the poor state of their troops in Bakhmut, launching a counteroffensive in this direction could cause a serious blow to Russian morale. This is just one of many potential directions for such an attack. Well, that's fascinating. Right. So what Tatarigami is saying, that if you really get to a situation where like Wagner and the Russian MOD are properly culminated and exhausted around here, particularly Wagner, then you could smash back, and he's actually going so far as to say and surround Horlivka. You could have one massive counter-offensive that could do that. I don't know whether that would be worth it. It wouldn't be top of my list of things to do, but I wonder whether you could, like right now, would be a great time before the 9th of May to actually create some counter-offensive for Bakhmut for political gains. I think it would be relatively easy if you had the troops to take back Bakhmut, certainly what they've lost over the last few months, and it'd be an absolute PR disaster for Russia. And and you could bet your bottom dollar if they did that, Ukrainians would be shouting about that to the high heavens there, because it would be really deeply embarrassing that it's taken 11 months now, isn't it, for the Russians not quite take Bakhmut, and then in a few weeks the Ukrainians just smash them back and take back all the territory they've lost just in time for Victory Day. I mean that would be ideal. Is that going to happen? No idea, but but it would be pretty amazing if it did for the Ukrainians, of course. Phillips O'Brien referring to the Kirby claims about 100,000 casualties since December, so in the last 5 months. 4 months or so, 100,000 casualties, 20,000 KIA, half of which are Wagner. And then there was confusion about whether this refers explicitly to Bakhmut or to the whole front line. It appears it was the whole front line. However, to say that 10,000 Wagner have died since December is referring to predominantly to Bakhmut. Phillips O'Brien says people trying to explain away Kirby's remarks about Russian losses and Bakhmut missed the point. He clearly is saying that Russian casualties around Bakhmut were massive, and Ukraine's choice to fight there has led to devastating Russian losses, a terrible, terrible cost. Had the Ukrainians pulled out Bakhmut months ago, these losses would not have occurred, and Russians would have declared victory, gone on the defensive, and the Ukrainian counteroffensive would have to deal with a large number of rested Russian troops. Absolutely right. And I've said now for a good week or so that Bakhmut has been a success for the Ukrainians, and I don't think you can contest that anymore. Pro-Russian voices in the threads will talk about how the Ukrainians have lost far more than Russians, but will provide absolutely no evidence for that. For the Ukrainians to still be there means that they have made a decision that it is in their best interest to do so, and the calculation is in their favor. That's self-evident. That you just can't argue that. The Ukrainians certainly believe that, and so therefore, either they're completely deluding themselves, or they are genuinely attriting the Russian forces at ratios that are advantageous to them. And I think the latter is far more rational and understandable than the former. But the former is what pro-Russians have to say, is that this is a completely delusional Ukrainian decision to defend there, even though they're, because they're losing such huge forces. It's just not going to have happened. They would have lost heavily, but the Russians will have lost more, and that's the point. Okay, moving on to Adivka, which is further down to the south here. We'll pop along to, I think that's all the sources on Bakhmut I have. Yeah, Tatarigami. Yes, so we can move on to see what Rebar, pro-Russian source, says. In the Adivka sector, Russian troops established control over the trenches south of Kamyanka. At the same time, the Ukrainian commander is moving additional forces to the front line in an attempt to hold on to the occupied territories. South of Avdiivka, the AFU has concentrated significant forces in Tonyenki and Severny, preparing for a new counterattack attempt. Russian drones monitor the movements of enemy units and target them with artillery fire. Okay, what that is to say is that the claim here is that the Russians are south now of Kamyanka in trenches, and you will see that now we have the Ukrainian. So Deep State map has updated, and indeed Syriac Maps is making a claim that, so here it is, Kamyanka is now under control of the Russians. I was saying that was a really useful place for the Ukrainians to hold out, but they've obviously lost that. Russian forces and DPR forces took control over the last trenches south of Kamyanka, thus fully securing the town 1 month later after troops entered in the northern part. So it's taken them a month to secure that town. It's been tough going for them, and this is what both those sources are saying, that being Syriac and Rebar, but also Ukrainian mapper Deep State saying that is now under Russian control. So that is a significant gain, I think, for the Russians. However, as Rebar says, they are piling in troops to Tonyenki and Severny for a potential counter-offensive. Yeah, it could be happening, or could just be Rebar talking nonsense. I'm not 100% sure. Let's go and see what ISW has to say. ISW talks about how all of these places having activity, repelled attacks around Avdivka, Pervomaisky, also further down south in Marinka and Novomykhailivka. We'll come on to that soon. And Krasnohorivka broke through Ukrainian defensive lines in Marinka. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. And that there have been Ukrainian counterattacks against Russian positions near Vodyanye, although I don't know any detail about that other than Deep State Map has some territory. So, but it's not really too much worthy of too much mention here. But that area of the field is now under or not under Russian control. So there has been some kind of counterattack around Vodyanya, it appears, in that area. But that's not represented by Syriac maps. In fact, Syriac maps only update today is this one here. No other map changes as far as I can work out. So either a really quiet day or things maybe aren't going so well for the Russians in Bakhmut. I don't know. That could be one of the explanations there. So that's what's going on in Avdivka. Not a lot, but some important movement around Kamyanka there. And indeed, having said that, although the pro-Ukrainian map of Deep State Map said that, yep, Kamyanka is now under control of the Russians here, there's actually a move back of the lines around here. So I don't know whether that's rejigging the map or whether the Ukrainians have pushed back the Russians in this area. There's some rejigging of the deep state map lines there. So it could be half a dozen one, six of the other, six and one, half a dozen the other. Okay, Marinka, no more details particularly other than, I guess, confirmation from the RSW, as you've just seen, that the Russians are now have pushed back, pushed beyond Druzhby Avenue. Deep State Map agrees with this as well. In fact, Deep State Map has more Russian control in this area than Syriac Map. So Deep State Map has more control for the Russians here and also here, whereas Syriac Maps has this whole field being not under Russian control. So is a little bit different amongst those two mappers, but that's your general understanding of what's going on there. The Russians have pushed the Ukrainians back towards the western suburbs, western areas of Marinka. So as the ISW said, there's activity around Novomykhailivka, which is down here towards Vuhledar. And that we in my last update, I said that the Ukrainians have really pushed back the Russians south of Pavlivka in this area there. Haven't heard much about that again or today. But the ISW does say that Russian forces did not conduct any confirmed or claimed ground attacks in Western Donetsk, but geolocated footage shows that Russian forces have made a marginal advance on the eastern outskirts of Vuhledar. So what does this refer to? Well, this is Russians in these trenches. These are shelling of the Russians. They are here. Let's see where here is and see whether it shows a marginal advance. That is here. So actually this then falls in line with what Syriac Maps has. I haven't adapted my map to show this, but Syriac Maps has the Russians in this area again, whereas Deep State Map doesn't. So it could be actually that I adapt my maps to have the Russians there if they are indeed in trenches active around that area. You can see these are the dachas there, these kind of houses, more rural housing out to the east of Vuhledar. But the Russians appear to be there, and that's been geolocated. Other than that, let's move on to Zaporizhia and Kherson. So as we zoom out of Vuhledar, it's worth watching reporting from Ukraine that talks about activity in the Zaporizhia area. Nesterianka particularly talk of activity there, which is just south of Orikhiv. If I zoom out, give you a sense of where that is. There's also talk, ISW says that Ukrainians have claimed that they've almost liberated Marfapil and other areas, other towns around here. However, Russians have denied that, so there's no confirmation either way. But it appears there has been Ukrainian activity taking place in Zaporizhia. Reporting from Ukraine is talking about that. There's also the the claim that Russians have dug up cattle graveyards that have got anthrax, and they themselves have contracted anthrax, which is obviously not a great thing. So that's an added complication for the Russian defenses in the area. But yeah, go and check out reporting from Ukraine. Talks quite a lot about activity going on there. Then we move on to Kherson. So, Russian sources are continuing to claim that Ukrainian forces are conducting raids across the Dnipro River. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces are trying to cross the Dnipro River to reach the left bank of the in Kherson Oblast, and claimed that Russian forces are repelling Ukrainian crossing attempts. A Russian commander of an unspecified unit operating on the east or left bank of the oblast of the river claimed that Russian forces constructed a deeply echeloned defensive line on this bank and are regularly identifying and defeating Ukrainian forces. Geolocated Russian footage published on the 30th showed Russian 126th Guards Coastal Defense Brigade shelling Ukrainian forces on Veliki Potemkin Island. And this is geolocated to here, so shelling on the island. That is at this location. And I'm going to show you a map from Poulet Volant that I meant to show you about 4 days ago, but I forgot. And I hope it's still a map that is current and up to date. But it is a really useful map. But nonetheless, okay, so here we are, which is an area that I have under Ukrainian control that the Russians are shelling, and that would seem to confirm the idea that they control that. So Poulet Volant did this map. When was it? On the 28th? Yeah, 3 days ago, 4 days ago. And this is a much more granular map as to who controls what. And that Veliki Potemkin Island is here. And he suggests that that is a grey zone where we've just seen the shelling. I've actually got that under Ukrainian control there. But yeah, this is how he sees it. So Russian control for many of the southern areas. Grey zone up here. And this is where there were claimed landings and activity for the Ukrainians along this stretch of land here, and all the talk about the Ukrainians getting purchase on the east bank, and then areas of grey zone, and even going out to here, Ukrainians controlling some of these islands to the north. So that's how accurate that still is, I don't know. I guess it's fairly dynamic in the area. My mapping has this Potemkin Island here having grey zone, Russian control and Ukrainian control on it. So I don't know. You take your pick as to which sources you believe. My idea would be all of this is probably grey zone here, and you are going to have a fairly dynamic situation with shelling taking place all over the shop, people getting spotted, buildings getting blown up, and then people escaping from those buildings. And who controls that? What denotes control in these situations? So yeah, it's going to be fairly dynamic. But the question is, does this indicate this kind of activity? Does it indicate that the Ukrainians have genuine intentions of crossing the river in some kind of counter-offensive move going forward? And the big question is about, well, if they do have those intentions, they need to get mechanized equipment across, and that is no easy thing. Perhaps you could think about a way you could get it across. You can fix up the dam, the crossing of the dam here. The dam is still operational. Could they do that and not get repeatedly hit by Russians? Well, that would mean they'd have to do counter battery fire right around this area to stop the Russians being able to hammer a particular place where you're going to cross. How dangerous would that be? So on and so forth. It's all about the crossing of mechanized equipment as far as having a meaningful counteroffensive going across the river is concerned. Anyway, that's pretty much that. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all of your support. I hope my brain made some kind of sense. It is struggling today. Beer plus MS plus talking and trying to make coherent sense. It's just not a good mix. So I hugely apologize. Take care, and I'll speak to you later.